So, hello, everybody. My name is Wendy Mitchell. I'm one of the consultants at the festival. So I'll be moderating today's masterclass with Mr. Olivier Assayas. We are delighted he's here, and he's here as part of a retrospective and to receive a big award last night. Maybe we'll start by asking about that award. Does it make you feel weird when you get... It's not a Lifetime Achievement Award, so they don't... You're not that old. But when you get an award or you see the films in the retrospective, does that make you sort of pause and look back, or that's not the way your brain works?
No, that's not the way my brain works. I think I've always been, even when I started, I was always focused with on the next film. You know, to me the issue is more like the next film. I mean, and anything that helps me make the next film is good. So yes. Including that award, okay. or the prize in Cannes or whatever. You know, I'm really, you know, it's when you get prizes or whatever. You know, it's the films are already behind you, and you know, there's something a little bit. To me, there's always something a bit melancholy about looking back, and what energizes me is much more about looking forward. And but then, you know, getting prizes also makes it easier for you to make the next film. So that's good.
We will look forward later, but I'm going to force you to look back as part of this sort of masterclass. I just wanted to talk a bit about your early interaction with film, because your dad was a screenwriter. And did he direct a bit as well?
He directed a couple of films.
Okay.
When he was Jewish, and he spent the war in South America, in Buenos Aires, and he was, you know, he was involved with the Free French, and he also directed a couple of films in Latin America, not in France.
And say when you were 10, 12, or a teenager, did you sit down and watch films with him, or were you discovering them on TV channels at night on your own?
You know, it's I grew up in the countryside, not in Paris. Okay. So it's not like I had like an easy access to any kind of cinematheque or whatever. So yeah, I mean, I discovered films. The films I loved, I discovered them on TV. You know, on a small TV of the time in black and white. There was no color. Color came a little later. I mean, you know, color came when I was like 8 or 10. So I suppose, but still, I mean, the classics were in black and white, and my experience of going to to watching movies was going to the local theaters, you know, small multiplexes in suburban Paris.
Okay. And were there certain films that stuck out when you were very young, or adolescent?
That stuck out. I don't know. You know, I mean, my early memories of watching films, same as I suppose all the kids in my generation. It was like big movies, like Ben-Hur, you know, in big theaters in Paris, or West Side Story. West Side Story played for years in theaters in Paris. So
you've got a West Side Story fan.
But then I don't know, for some reason the movies I remember watching on TV as a kid were usually movies that are disturbing for kids. You know, like scary. I remember watching Jules Dassin's Rififi, Los Olvidados by Buñuel. Those kind of movies that even when I remember them, they still scare me. But I think it's also a bit different from what attracted me to cinema, because if those movies had been my inspiration, they were, you know, they had this kind of post-war darkness, gloom to them. That's not what I've been looking for in movies. I mean, what has attracted me in movies is how they connect with real life, with nature, with beauty, with light, or whatever.
I mean, I think it's very interesting that you wrote for a while for Cahiers du Cinéma, which is the most important film magazine in France. And while you were there, I think you wrote a lot about sort of American cinema in a way that they hadn't been writing about before.
No, but you know, I came at Cahiers du Cinéma at a very interesting moment, in a sense that the magazine had been involved in Maoist politics. I mean, luckily I had not been involved in Maoist politics, but they had been, and they had been, mostly writing about, I don't know, what Chairman Mao said about filmmaking in his, in his talks about art. They had been, and they were very involved in the Maoist trend in French leftism of the time. I had been involved in French leftism, but at least not in the totalitarian blend of it. I was much more involved in more like counterculture. I was certainly more influenced by painting than by the or pop music or whatever of the time than by the politics, the political theory of the time. So when I came into Cahiers du Cinéma, it's because they had been opening up to younger writers. So they needed young cinephiles to bring some kind of renewal of whatever their politics and their relationship to cinema had been. So everything was open because they had not been writing about cinema for years. So all of a sudden, everything was new. You could. I remember, just going with a few other writers to LA, and we made like 2 special issues of the magazine about modern American cinema. We all of a sudden we interviewed French actors. There hadn't been an interview with a French actor for years in the magazine before that. So for me, it was great because I was a kid and I was discovering world cinema, international cinema, as a journalist. But to me, it was more like film school.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And Asian cinema as well at that time?
Asian cinema is, it's the big event. I mean, we were discussing my career writing for Cahiers du Cinéma. That's like 5 years, which is a lot. I mean, I wrote a lot of stuff during those 5 years, but like the big event during those years was the discovery of Chinese cinema. It was not on the map. There was a vague awareness that there had been, Chinese filmmakers, but the name that stood out was like Bruce Lee. So it's the film was showing in like at least in Paris, in cinemas, for very popular theaters for migrants. Because the Hong Kong movies were popular in North Africa, in Africa. So the guys who watched those movies in their countries, they wanted more, and but it was completely off the map, and gradually, thanks to Marco Müller, who later, was the head of the Venice Film Festival, and who organized the first big retrospective of Chinese cinema in 1981 in Torino. All of a sudden, just people became aware that not only Chinese cinema had a past, but it also had a present, and you had young filmmakers who were starting to make films, and you had really exciting genre filmmaking happening here and there. So I was immediately attracted to it, also because I had also been I had an interest in Chinese thought, in Chinese art, etc. So when the door of Chinese cinema opened up, I just rushed in, and with my friend Charles Tesson, who now is the head of the Critics Week in Cannes, we dedicated a whole issue of Cahiers du Cinéma to Chinese, to Hong Kong cinema, actually. And I met at that time Ho Xiaoshen, Edward Liang, who were young filmmakers. They were beginning, and I was like one of the first Western writers to write about their work.
Right. So all this writing about all this interesting cinema, I guess, how did that crystallize for you that you were going to direct, and did some
I
of
wanted
this,
to direct.
You just knew
I wanted to direct. I mean, and if I only did things. I mean, I felt weird writing about films because it had not crossed my mind that I would go that route. I mean, to me, what was exciting was making my own short films. But I think I realized that I kind of needed just to focus my ideas on cinema, to put it that way. I mean, I think I came from being a from visual arts. I mean, I painted, I drew, I did graphism, and I think that my ideas about cinema were very naive, were very vague, and writing for Cahiers du Cinéma helped me just make sense of and or even discussing with filmmakers I admired, thanks to the magazine. It just helped me just make sense of what I wanted to do as a filmmaker. But that was the one reason I was writing. I mean, I never lost that perspective.
And with your first feature, Disorder, 1986?
86.
Yeah. It's kind of got some elements of film noir. It's got like a punk angle. I mean, why was that the right sort of film for your first feature?
I think that what differentiated me in the end with other French filmmakers of my generation and eventually from filmmakers before me was that instead of being influenced by jazz, I was interested by punk rock, which was a big step forward. I think that when I was music was always the big thing for me. When I grew up in the 70s, I had this sense that the energy of the moment, what really mattered as some kind of poetry of my time was rock and roll, in a way or another. Politics, experimental cinema, and music. But music had this immediate relationship to the present. Music is an echo of what is happening right here, right now, and that was the most exciting for me. Movies were not that exciting. They was less exciting. Movies had been exciting at the time of the New Wave and when of the French Nouvelle Vague. I mean, and the way it echoed all around the world, and all of a sudden they were in touch with something vibrant, vital. In the 70s, it was music. Movies were a bit secondary. So when I started making films, it was immediately with the notion of trying to capture something in film of the energy that had influenced me in music. And my roots were as much in the history of cinema, because yes, of course, I have been, cinema has been such an important part of my life always, but still the energy was the energy of music.
Is that still the same? I mean, you've worked with some great bands on your films, Brian Eno and Sonic Youth, and
sure. Yes and no. I mean, I don't have the same relationship, whatever music is happening right now, to the kind of music I was listening to when I was 14 or 15.
But is music still a big part of your life?
Yeah, it is. I listen to a lot of music, but it's not that vital. It's less. It depends. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's not. But not. It's less of an influence. Also because now music comes as a package. It comes with the video, with the music video, which as an art form is not that exciting to me. It's like a pre-chewed images for music. What influenced me with the energy of music was the fact that it didn't come pre-packaged with its own images. It came with a look. Yes, sure. Like in the mid 70s, all of a sudden, the way bands looked, the graphic design around whatever the Sex Pistols were doing or the Clash was a certain part of it. But still, in terms of how to visualize that music, it was up to you. And now it's. Again, maybe if I related a bit more to whatever is happening in music videos, I would be more interested. But ultimately, I genuinely don't. So it's I kind of lose a part of what interested me in music.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Was it from after Disorder that André Téchiné asked you to write Rendezvous for him?
No, it was before that.
Before. Okay.
It was before. When I was writing for Cahiers du Cinéma, I was. You don't make a living writing for those kind of magazines, right?
Yes.
So you need to have a day job. So it was more like. I made my own short films, but again, that was not a way to make a living. So I worked as a screenwriter. I worked as a screenwriter first for friends who were like, who were like me, who were making short films and wanted to move on and make greater things, and ultimately with André Téchiné. But it's a lot. So meeting André Téchiné was a big influence on me. I mean, you know, it was very important for me. But this whole thing of working as a screenwriter was essential, because I felt that whenever I was writing for the magazine for Cahiers, I was also practicing cinema. So it was like back and forth. I was involved in filmmaking and at the same time trying to reflect on my practice as a filmmaker.
Interesting. I mean, with something like Irma Vep, I'm jumping ahead a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
You know, had sort of some of those thoughts? It's kind of about filmmaking. It's kind of about an Asian film star. How did you sort of coalesce all these sort of? How do you sit down and bring together everything that's in your head?
Well, it comes at a weird moment for me. It comes when I've been working like for a couple of years on a big project, which ended up becoming Les Destinées Sentimentales, like a big period piece, 3 hours. Adapted from a classic French novel, and it ended up happening like 4 years later. But in 1996 when I made Irma Vep, it was in the works. It was going to happen. Maybe sometimes, we're not sure. Depends on the financing. Just please wait. And I can't sit still. You know, I can't just wait for the film to happen. So I had this kind of short window of opportunity to make very fast another movie. And I was so frustrated with the whole financing, the heaviness of the financing of Les Destinées Sentimentales, the heaviness of the film industry. I had a lot of, it's that frustration came out as some kind of really radical, funny, fast-moving spoof of the film industry, and to me, it was more like an experimental film. We made it on no money. We shot it in like 4 weeks, meaning also the crew was paid for 3 weeks, and invested their work on the 4th week. They got paid back. I wrote it in 9 days. And I had to shoot it right away, because after that it would be too late. It would conflict with the distance. So I shot it. I wrote it in the summer. I shot it like in December and January, and in May we shot it in Cannes. So it moved like really fast. And to me, it was a bit. What inspired me were like the collage movies that Godard was doing in the 60s. I thought that it's something that the French cinema had lost its capacity, because the whole process of financing movies is so slow. I mean, in the 60s, in the 50s, it was faster in a certain way. You wrote a screenplay, someone was interested in financing it, and it happened. The whole process of making independent films slowed down terribly in the 70s and the 80s, because all of a sudden you had to go through commissions, committees who meet like 3 times a year. So you get some money from some committee, after 6 months wait, and then you move on to the next one. And it's the whole process has made cinema lose touch with the present. And I thought that you can also try to make movies in the same pace as pop music happens. So just grabbing stuff that's just there floating around and coalescing them in something that is more like a collage than an actual film. And I think there's some excitement there, some energy there, and that's basically what gave birth to Irma Vep.
Can you get that energy today, or is it still quite a slow process to put a film together?
I'm always trying to make films fast. I mean, I think that you need to keep focused on the reason why you wanted to make the film in the first place. I mean, if 6 months later you've forgotten really about it. For instance, when I'm personal shopper, it's pretty much. I mean, it was a bit slower than I would have liked, but still, it's. I was personal shopper is a movie that happened because I had been preparing a film in Canada, which was like supposed to be some kind of American-French film, and we prepared it for 2 months. I mean, I had been researching it, writing it, took me ages. We prepared it for 2 months, and the day before the shooting, we lost our financer, who was an American madman. I used to call him American Psycho. So all of a sudden, the movie was
free time.
I had free time. Yeah, I had free time. So I came back to Paris, and I just sat down, wrote Personal Shopper like very fast in 6 weeks or something, 6 weeks, and we instantly got it moving. We shot it in the fall.
And you said you wanted to make a film about contemporary Paris. Why was that something you were eager to do again?
Because I had not done it for. It's my life, and it's something I had not done for a while. I mean, I had been doing. Clouds of Sils Maria is outside of time in a certain way. It's not anchored in any kind of solid present. It's a bit more abstract. And before that, I made something in the air. Carlos. Some of the films were in Paris, but they were in Paris in the 70s. So I could not use the energy of the city. I could not represent whatever was the pulse of the city. And and it's something I had done a lot in my earlier film, and I thought I would be bored, shooting a film in Paris again, and it was the opposite. I found it inspiring and exciting, much more than what I had anticipated.
It has a sort of lightness to it, the film, maybe because it wasn't developed for 2 years or something.
Yes. Yeah. There is something very spontaneous. I mean, I have a couple of, I always have notes on films I want to make, which I develop or don't develop. Personal Shopper, I made it a point. I just wanted to come from nowhere. I just wanted to start from scratch and see where it takes me.
And did you enjoy this might be the first of your films that has this sort of otherworldly element, sort of a supernatural, or I don't know how you'd want to describe it. Was that interesting for you to play with that in film, or was that a challenge?
It's something that I had wanted to do for a long time. I mean, I think it's there in my other movies in a way or another, but not. I never felt ready or wanted or felt it was right to go all the way. But in a movie like Clouds of Sils Maria, it's there in a certain way. It's present. You have this kind of invisible vibe floating around, and I think it kind of emboldened me. I mean, I thought I was a bit nervous about it when I wrote and made Sils Maria, and because I got away with it, I thought, okay, maybe let's see if I go a little further. What happens if I go a little further than that? Yeah. And
you've obviously worked with Kristen Stewart on both of those films. What do you see in her as an actress that you like to collaborate with?
I think I discovered Kristen Stewart when we were making Clouds of Sils Maria. I mean, when Clouds of Sils Maria was written around Juliette Binoche, and I needed this young American modern girl to interact with her, and my obvious choice was Kristen, because I had met her a couple of times. I liked her a lot. I loved her work, but I did not realize the extent of her talents. I didn't and I think that as everybody in a certain way discovered something about her watching Clouds of Sils Maria, I discovered her on the set for basically the same reasons. I realized that there was much more to her than whatever I had imagined, and she had an amazing instinct and I think she photographed in a unique. She photographed like in a unique way. So. After making Clouds of Sils Maria, I felt that the character I had given her was a bit one-dimensional. That if I had known her better, maybe I would have I don't know, but I mean possibly I would have emphasized the character or written it slightly differently. So when I wrote Personal Shopper, inspired by her. I was not sure she would want to do it. I mean, maybe I thought it might be a bit too weird for her or something like that. So, but still, I was inspired by her and by what I sensed she could do when I was writing Maureen in Personal Shopper.
I guess in general, how do you prepare with an actor or actress? Do you go through the script? Do you talk about backstories? Do you do lots of rehearsals? Does it depend?
No, I don't work with actors. No.
You give them the script.
I just give them the script and I hardly discuss it with them.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, if they want to discuss, you know, okay, sure, fine, I will answer their question, I will do my best, but I mean, I don't need it.
Okay.
I don't need it. I mean,
Do sometimes they need it? Or?
Once in a while they need it, but I think if they need it too much, it gets me worried. No, I mean in the sense that I need the actors to connect in their own way with the story, the characters, and I want to discover it on the set. I mean, I think if I choose one specific actor, it's because I feel that there is an interaction with the character that can be exciting. Because in their own way, what interests me is also the way they contradict whatever I had in mind when I. So if I start explaining what I had in mind before, it might make them a bit. I mean, they will want to adapt to my vision. And I don't want them to adapt to my vision. I want them to bring their own thoughts, their own ideas, their own feelings to the character. And so when we start shooting, I will be there to channel things. If they go off the track too much, you know, I will kind of bring them back. But usually they understand extremely well the character, and even sometimes when I'm surprised with the way they will approach it, most of the times their vision is more exciting or more interesting than whatever I had in mind when I was writing. I mean, just in the sense that it gives more perspective, it gives some human reality to something that is just words on the paper.
Has there ever been a time that this sort of approach doesn't quite work and somebody, you don't have to name a name, but, you know, has it ever, you know, you show up on set and somebody's doing something different than you envisioned, but you don't think you can use it?
I mean, okay, when I was preparing that film, I was supposed to shoot in Canada. Did not happen. One of the key characters was Robert Deniro. Robert Deniro works in absolutely the opposite way of whatever I did with any actor in my life. I mean, in the sense that he's obsessed with control. I hate control. I mean, control to me is like the boring thing. Most boring thing in cinema or in real life. But I'm a fan. I mean, I love his work. I admire him. I think, I was convinced he would be great in the film. But, I mean, I would have to go through seances of fittings, just discussing the pants and the length of the pants or the texture of the pants or the way, there was he had like those assistants, and there was someone who was like in charge of his necktie. Of how he how he knotted the neckties and said he would turn to me and say, do you think it's right? Is this good? Well, Bob, if you say so, I'm sure. Yeah, it's great. And then he would turn to the guy and say, maybe if he moved it a little bit like this, and say, oh my God, and we would have another session like a week later, and he would say, I thought about it. The texture of the pants, they were not right. I asked for other, and I had to go through that stuff, yeah. And we rewrote his lines. We rewrote his lines because the character was a Chicago mafia boss, so he wanted to meet. I did a lot of research. I'm obsessive with research, So that part was fine with me, but he would start working. He asked, okay. For the way that guy speaks, I need to meet someone who has known him. I say, yeah, sure. So I provided someone, but he was not interested in the guy because he was not the right profile or whatever. So he brought this guy who is this kind of caricature of
Mobster.
mobster, you know, with pinstripe suits and whatever, and who just all of a sudden who helped him rewrite because he had known that the specific mafia boss, so he helped him. So you know, we went through sessions, and I thought the sessions were boring. I thought the guy was full of shit, and so you know, I had to go through the whole process, and then at some point, you know, Deniro called me and said, you know, I'm not happy with the stuff we've been doing with that guy, but I met another guy who's really interesting. He was the guy I suggested him in the first place, right? Yeah. So and we rewrote the whole thing again, and you know, and it goes on and on and on until we've gone through every single scene, every single line in every single scene, every single, you know, pants, you know, and necktie and whatever, and then the film did not happen. But it's like I had already finished the job. I just had to record whatever we had been doing, which is to me a bit boring, on the boring side. But then I totally adapted, not just because he's Robert De Niro, because he's an actor who functions like that. Yeah. He kind of needs this process, and I have to agree with him that whatever he brought to the character and to the film was excellent. You know, it was really, he was right. I mean, it was a process of trial and error, okay, but still, you know, extremely relevant. So, you know, again, I mean, you know, you can't have like an ideology of how to function with actors. You have to adapt.
Sort of adapt.
Of course.
Yeah. And will this film happen in the future, maybe?
It may.
Okay. With Robert De Niro, he's got the pants ready. So
yeah, no, I know.
Come back?
but it may be it may be
or...
another actor. It may be another actor. Yeah.
I wanted to ask about Carlos. It's a very interesting project for you because it's 5.5 hours long, a TV series, and one of the first times you worked on a TV show like that size.
Yeah. I'm extremely cautious with the term TV in a sense that to me the reason I did it is because I did it in exactly the same conditions as I do my movies. So to me, Carlos is a 5.5-hour movie. If you have the patience, you should watch it the full version on a big screen.
And they show it on big screens, and it showed in Cannes.
Yes, but I mean, I'm not saying that out of it's not just a theoretical approach. It's the way I shot it. I mean, the budget I had to make Carlos is much more money than whatever I had to make to make other movies. So I could be. It's on a grander scale. It's bigger. It's more cinematic. I shot it in widescreen. On film stock, and it's a movie that to be enjoyed has to really be so. I used the TV money to make a movie I would never have been able to make in cinema. I mean, you know, I was just, you know, you have to laugh out loud, just imagining how a film producer would feel if I have a great idea. We are going to make a movie about a terrorist. It will be 5.5 hours long. We will shoot in 10 countries, and only 10% of the film is in the French language. Yeah. You know, and we need you know, something like $13 or $40 million to make the film. I mean, he would have laughed in my face.
Did you enjoy working on that scale?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
I did. It gave me, but you know, the length gives you the space to deal with issues that you can't deal with in the format of narrative cinema. I mean, I'm saying that in the sense that Carlos is a movie about how the world has changed during those 15, 20 years, and it's a movie about geopolitics. And I think that if you want to deal with something that is as complex as the evolution of leftism and the end of the Cold War, the use or not of terrorist weapons during that period, and what it exactly meant, it's a very dangerous terrain. I mean, it's extremely complex issues, and they really have to be very tactfully handled. So you need time. You can't go to the brutal synthesizations that the cinema sometimes uses. You have to be specific. You have to be careful. You have to be very nuanced. Otherwise, you don't get away with it.
Yeah, but just having 5.5 hours to follow a character, that must be. Is that a dream, or is that tough?
It's tough, but I understood instantly that I was extremely lucky because I immediately found the right character. The thing is that I found Carlos. So if I had not found Carlos, meaning Edgar Ramirez, I would not have made the film. I mean, because you don't embark on that kind of endeavor. I mean, if you don't have the security that you have absolutely the right character, I think it was fascinating to film someone like Edgar Ramirez, who I mean, he was virtually an unknown, and now he's he became big thanks to that film. But he always had that potential, and to give the opportunity to that actor to do something that's so complex, so to represent this character at different moments in his life, at different ages and all, it was really exciting. But it was exciting because Edgar was great. And I had a great supporting cast. I mean, I was the thing about Carlos, I spent most of my time when I was preparing the film, casting the film, because that was the issue, really.
Yeah. And with Edgar, did you just sort of, again, give him the script and say...
Yes.
Do what you will, or you?
Not far from that. Not far from that. I mean, it's to me, the thing was, I wanted someone from Venezuela, like Carlos, who had also the same cosmopolitan culture, which again Edgar had, and also who had the physicality of Carlos. Carlos has to be imposing. He has this very physical presence. When I met Edgar and I started speaking with him, I realized I had him. The thing is, because the thing is that Carlos in his time was whatever. He was a playboy. He was an activist. He was a militant. He was thug, but he was kind of bigger than life. So to understand how he fascinated the guy, the European leftist who functioned with him, you needed that charisma. You needed this kind of bigger than life presence. And when I met Edgar in Paris, and I spent we spent 3-4 hours speaking. So I thought, he's the guy. He's the guy. He has this thing. I mean, he's impressive. He's physically he's an extremely smart person. Because he's Venezuelan, because he comes from an educated family, he knows about the politics of Carlos extremely well. And I mean, everything I was dealing with, it's something that nothing was new to him. He knew that story. And again, he had this charisma. So it's I let him do his homework. Yeah. He started. I mean, I would let him. Again, if we're talking wardrobe, if we're talking hair and makeup, etc., I let him control that. I mean, he worked with my wardrobe designer, and I did not spend hours thinking. I gave them a few photos of Carlos at different moments, and they had all the research, etc. And he worked with the wardrobe guy. He worked on his hair. He worked on his on his mustache and beard or whatever. And they showed me the result. And usually I had very little to say. They kind of nailed it every time.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a good time to maybe open up for some questions. Sure. We have some microphones. Don't be shy. We've got we'll start there, and then there's a question in the very front row. Oh, yes. Sorry.
Kristen Stewart seems to be your muse for the moment. Are you planning to use her again for another film in the future? Or do you have another star in mind?
It's psychologically, I'm ready to shoot with Kristen tomorrow, like any time. But no, but I don't have the right project at this point yet. I hope I will come up with it, but not now. Okay. Not yet.
Yeah, just right here in the front row, if we can.
Could you tell us a bit more about your writing process, especially when you write really fast? Like, how do you organize your thoughts? I mean, you said you wrote a film in 9 days. That just seems impossible.
Well, that's the one time I wrote a screenplay in 9 days, right? I mean, it's not like I do it every single time. The thing is, I think the only answer I can give you is you can function like that if you have fun writing. If it's not a torture, if it's not a difficult, complex process, if you enjoy your writing, if you have fun writing, if Irma Vep it was a blast. I mean, I just loved making. I loved the process. It was just like one of the most exciting cinematic experience I went through. But it only happens once in a blue moon. I mean, you can't really generate it. You can't sit down and say, okay, I'm going to write a screenplay in 9 days. It just happens to you. But when I wrote Irma Vep, it was more like anything goes. Anything goes. I'm making an experimental film. That's it. Let's try things. I mean, everything is allowed. So I had this premise of a Chinese actress coming to Paris, and she bumps into Jean-Pierre Léaud, who's I love him, but he's weird, especially when you come from Asia. And so I thought that I had the premise for a comedy, really. And I'm not great. I'm not a comedy writer. I would love to be, but it's not my skill. But here, in the case of Irma Vep, I had for once, the potential for a comedy. So I kind of, it's self-generated. I just have had fun writing it. But otherwise, the way I function is. If it's a fast or slow process, depending, but I work a lot on the structure. I work a lot on this. I spend really time until I feel I have a backbone to the story, and then once I feel I have a backbone, that it's something that functions, I start writing, but I have space to reinvent in the process of writing. Once in a while, I would just speed up this or that part, or emphasize this or that. But when I'm shooting, I will go through the same process. Meaning I don't have fun writing. Just filming the scene as I wrote it. It has to bring something, and I have to be able to reinvent the scene on the set. But the thing is that in the back of my mind, I have this backbone, and I know exactly where this fits in the grand scheme.
And do you also tend to reinvent things in the edit? Or by the time you get to the edit, you're...
By the time I get to the edit, I mean, a lot of filmmakers, like right now, I've worked with Roman Polanski. I wrote a screenplay with him, and I wrote a first version of it, and we kept more or less everything I had written in the first version, except the way he functioned. He kind of juggles with the scenes, and he puts one before the other. He kind of, he has this editing process of shuffling scenes. I don't function like that. I just need to have the conviction that my narrative works.
And that's why it's important to get that backbone, I guess.
It's so in the editing room, I reshaped things when I'm in the process of writing. I reshaped things in the process of shooting. But in terms of the backbone, I keep it.
Okay, great. Can we go
Sure.
to that man?
Hearing you speak about Carlos, it made me think about the fact that so many characters that we see in movies today have gone to the simple, one-dimensional end of the spectrum, while more and more of the TV drama that we see is deep, thought-provoking, given the time to the creators to develop the characters.
Sure.
So having worked on something that's really cinema, but TV was the medium that allowed it to happen, I wonder if you have Any thoughts?
Well, it's I love okay, because what I was describing is also how the writer functions. As a filmmaker, I kind of need the big screen. I need, you know, it's even if I realize, because the thing is that it's not TV, it's the format of TV, right? It's the fact that you have length, you have time. You can explore your characters. You can add layers and so on and so forth. So it's very satisfying when you're a writer. When you're a director, it's less satisfying because it's. I think that the excitement of cinema is something that you don't. I mean, the TV doesn't generate that kind of excitement. It's and also there is something dreamlike to cinema. There's a specific poetry to the visuals of cinema, which really does function in the movie theater. I mean, that's the way you know. So I never could adapt, and also. I don't like so much the TV format. I mean, because when I'm making. When I'm making Carlos, my reference, it's more like Fanny and Alexander by Ingmar Bergman rather than The Wire or something like that. You know, when it's too long, it's just to me I lose the thread. I mean, I just don't have the patience to sit through it. I think I think you add layer upon layer. For a while it's exciting, and after a while it's not exciting anymore. It's just about piling up stuff, and what my reference points were more like I don't know, like the Godfather trilogy or whatever. You know, it's what I had in mind, because I'm not telling something that, I mean. A TV series doesn't really have an ending. It just regenerates, and I'm more interested in narratives that have, you know, a beginning, a middle, and an end. I mean, that have that kind of arc.
Interesting. Yes.
Wonderful movies you've done all your time. We've seen Personal Shopper yesterday, and it was really wonderfully done. And also, don't want to give away the ending, but the ending was really boom. It was really perfect. You couldn't have done it better. But how did you pitch that movie? I mean, of course, it's. I mean, if you're Olivier Assayas, I think you go and say, "I have a new movie," and everyone is like, "Yeah, I'm on it." But how did you? Does this story, because it's so
yeah, no, excellent question. Yeah, I have a hard time once in a while getting my films financed. Yes. It's because it's not exactly a genre movie. It has genre element, but it's not genre. It's not like you're not going to get like a lot of money on the international market in the end. But the thing is that I got away with it because it's not that expensive. You know, we're talking about it's a $4-5 million movie, which is and Clouds of South Maria had been doing really well, and Kristen Stewart is a big star, and so they're not so fond of the screenplay, but they're still going to put some more money in it. Yeah, but it's not easy. It's not easy. Kristen, no. I mean, Kristen. I mean, she was part of it the minute she read it. I mean, you know, she was extremely supportive, and to me, the trouble was that. I mean, I think Kristen inspired the film. I mean, I would not have written that character if I had not worked with her in my previous film, but I was not sure she would do it. You know, I thought she would find it too weird, or she doesn't have the time, or whatever. But like, you know, so I gave her the screenplay. She read it and instantly called me saying, I want to do it. But except the problem is that she had like two other movies lined up. I mean, she was doing a movie with Ang Lee, and then after that she was making a film with Woody Allen, and then she had some free time. So I had to just sit down and and wait for a few months. I had to be extremely patient and wait that Woody Allen is finished with his film.
Is there some more questions? Can we ask here?
Hi, thank you to be here. I'm asking where the idea to mix this genre plot and the fashion world comes from.
Well, I like genre. I mean, I've always been extremely influenced, even when I started when I was writing about films. I mean, I've always been very influenced by genre filmmaking, because I think that genre filmmaking relates to the body of the audience. You know, it speaks to the body. You react with your body to genre, which is a very exciting dimension of cinema, and I think that the filmmaker who inspired me the most, who influenced me the most when I started making film, were genre filmmakers. I mean, great genre filmmakers like David Cronenberg, like John Carpenter, like Wes Craven. I mean, you know, those were really the guys who were, when they you know, I remember watching. The Hill Have Eyes, or Last House on the Left, or Fog, or Halloween, or anything by David Cronenberg, and having this sense that those young filmmakers are the equivalent of independent filmmaking in the US at that time. They were young filmmakers who were using genre to make movies, but they're very abstract, very ambitious, and artistically much more valuable than whatever came from much more recognized areas of filmmaking. So I kind of stayed with this notion that you can touch a nerve. I mean, through using genre elements. So when I'm telling the story, I don't shy away from using genre elements, because they help me convey something that's important and that I'm not sure I would be able to convey them through another conduit. Something like that, and it's but you know, again, you know, I don't think I would be able to make something that's purely a genre film. But I don't think that the movies of of Dario Argento or David Cronenberg are pure genre films. They are just great films on their own right. The fashion world was interesting for me, in the sense that, of course, I mean, you know, I wanted to. I mean, to me, the film is very much about the tension, about the visible and invisible, in the sense of, on one side, our job, or the way we have to make a living, to go through the motions of, you know, just. Of dealing with practical things, and on the other side, whatever our fantasies, our dream world, our imaginations are about. And I think that our imaginations, our dream world, and our relationship to ideas, to theories, to thought, is much more powerful than our relationship with the material world. So I kind of emphasize. I mean, I gave Maureen the most alienated, silly job of dealing with the fashion industry, which is all about surface. It can't be more surface than that. But at the same time, because it deals with femininity, and she's questioning her own femininity, she's questioning her gender, really, her identity. So there is also something embedded in the fashion industry, which at the same time repulses her, and also gets also under her skin in its own way.
And we have time for one more question, so maybe just this gentleman right there.
Hi, I just wondered if there are any young filmmakers that excite you, and what was the last movie that blew your mind?
I watch a lot of movies, so you know, there's a lot of very exciting filmmaking happening right now. I'm convinced. The last film I was really impressed with is Tony Erdmann by Marenade, but I always loved her work. I mean, I've always, championed her. I liked very much Allen Anderen, the previous film she did, and that's where I saw Lars Eidinger. You know, I used Lars Eidinger in my last two films. I saw him in a Marenade movie, and I'm just so happy that she's getting the very deserved recognition now.
Okay. I'm going to wrap up just by asking, you know, what's percolating for the future? Are there things that you're still itching to try, something new, something different?
Yes, there is.
Yeah.
But again, you know, it's I'm really happy to be discussing my films here, and look back and develop some kind of theory on how I've been making this or that. But the harsh reality is basically, at some point I feel like I have my back to the wall and I have no idea what I'm going to do next. And I try to grab some idea and try to construct something that will eventually look like a film, but it's really sometimes scary.
Yeah, I was going to ask, is it fearful when you're looking ahead and you don't quite know what's next, or is that exciting?
It's it's exciting. It's exciting. I mean, I kind of need. I mean, it would be boring otherwise. I mean, there has to be a sense of danger. I have to start making a film, not knowing exactly how I will manage or how I will get away with it. Or something like that.
Well, it works. So
once in a while.
Thank you so much for your smart questions, everybody, and thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.